Hey there, welcome back. Tonight we were taking a quiet journey along the banks of the Nile, into a world where beauty meant more than perfume and paint. In ancient Egypt, appearance wasn't vanity, it was sacred. So let's slow down, breathe a little, and see what these rituals can tell us about how they lived, loved, and saw themselves beneath the desert sun. All you have to do is settle in, get comfortable, and let the story drift over you, like incense smoke curling through a temple at dusk. Before we start, a small favor. If you enjoy these slow, sleepy journeys through history, consider liking the video or subscribing, only if you really enjoy it. And while you're here, tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. I love imagining this invisible web of listeners, scattered across the world, drifting off to the same tale under different skies. The air in Egypt was dry, soft and shimmering. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost feel it. A fine golden warmth brushing your skin, carrying the scent of water and dust. The Nile flows slowly beside you, endless and patient. The same river that once mirrored the faces of queens and farmers alike. It wasn't just a river to them, it was life itself, and the mirror of the gods. The Egyptians believed that to live beautifully was to live rightly. Beauty wasn't about showing off, not really. It was a form of harmony, Matt, they called it. The balance between the body, the spirit, and the world. Every painted eyelid, every perfumed oil, every careful braid was part of that balance. Even the poorest farmer, trudging home through the sand, might stop to wash his hands and smooth his hair before dinner. It was a quiet act of respect, not vanity. To them, cleanliness was a small piece of holiness. Picture the early morning in Thebes. The sun rises over flat roofs, gilding them with light. Inside a small mud brick house, a woman stirs a pot of water over a tiny flame. She mixes in natron, that soft, chalky mineral they used for everything from cleaning to mummification. She dips a linen cloth into the mixture and wipes her skin. The scent is sharp, clean, a little salty. There were no soaps like ours, no bottles with flowery labels. Their beauty began with nature. Salt, clay, oils, and resins gathered from desert and delta. To an Egyptian, the body was a temple, one that needed tending before the soul could truly shine. And so every day began not with mirrors, but with ritual. You can almost hear the scratch of pottery jars being opened, the sound of a bronze mirror being set on the table. A servant pours thick oil into a bowl. It glows like honey. Inside, bits of myrrh and frankincense drift lazily. The mistress of the house dips her fingers in and rubs the oil along her arms, her legs, her face. The smell, rich and golden, fills the small room. Egyptian oils were more than moisturizers. They were protection against the burning sun, the biting sand, and the dryness of the wind. Even men used them, especially those working outdoors. Soldiers rubbed oil into their skin before battle, priests before prayer. To be oiled was to be alive, shining under Ra's light. And there's something strangely modern about that. They were using natural SPF long before we gave it a name. If you wandered through an Egyptian market back then, you'd find entire stalls dedicated to beauty, small clay jars filled with scented fats, cones of incense stacked like fruit, tiny mirrors polished until they caught every glimmer of the sun. Women would haggle for perfume made from lotus or almond oil, or for chunks of malachite, the green stone ground into the coal that lined their eyes. It wasn't only about fashion, those colors had meaning. Green meant life, rebirth, the lushness of the Nile after the floods. Black meant protection, like the eternal night sky. And when they painted their eyelids with black coal, they believed it shielded them, not only from the sun's glare, but from evil spirits too. Science, centuries later, would prove them partly right. That coal contained trace amounts of lead salts that helped kill bacteria and reduce eye infections. In other words, their beauty kept them healthy. Sometimes I imagine an Egyptian noblewoman standing before her mirror. Her servants surround her, holding small jars and brushes. The room smells like sweet resin and smoke. Her hair is dark and braided, tucked under a wig of black curls, scented with palm oil and beeswax. She leans forward slightly as her eyelids are painted in deep green lines. her lips stained red with ochre. Outside, the desert hums softly. Inside, time feels suspended. She isn't rushing. Beauty in Egypt was never rushed. It was part of the rhythm of living, as slow and deliberate as the river itself. And somewhere far away in a temple courtyard, a priest is doing almost the same thing, purifying his body with water, rubbing oil into his arms, preparing to speak with the gods. In Egypt, beauty belonged to everyone, men, women, even the dead. Let's take a moment to imagine the materials themselves. Small alabaster jars, cool to the touch. Bronze mirrors shaped like lotus flowers. Ivory combs carved with lions and ibises. These were not cheap trinkets. They were tiny works of devotion. Even in tombs, these objects were placed beside the dead, so they could remain beautiful forever. It tells you something about their beliefs. Beauty didn't end with death. It was part of eternity. You entered the next world looking your best, because the gods would notice. I like to think there's comfort in that idea, that somewhere under all the ritual and the powder and the perfume, there was a belief that to care for the body was to honor the soul. In a way, Egypt's beauty culture was a science of survival wrapped in art. Their perfumes weren't just pleasant. They helped mask the strong smells of the heat. Their oils protected their skin. Their cosmetics carried antiseptic minerals. Even their wigs were practical, shielding them from lice and sunburn. But they elevated these necessities into elegance. They turned hygiene into holiness. It's easy to forget, in our world of bottles and brands, that once upon a time, someone crushed petals and resins by hand, whispering a small prayer as they worked. Imagine standing in an ancient workshop by the Nile. The air is thick with the scent of melted resin and crushed lotus flowers. Women grind stones with small bronze mortars, their hands stained with red and green dust. Another pours hot oil over powdered herbs, stirring slowly until the mixture cools into a balm. A priest walks in to bless the work, not because it's fancy, but because it's sacred. The perfumes made here might travel to temples, palaces, or even burial chambers. Every scent had a meaning. Myrrh for worship, lotus for love, frankincense for purity, and honey, always honey, for sweetness, healing, and preservation. At night, when the heat fades, the rituals continue. Women sit on their rooftops under the stars, combing their wigs, rebraiding them carefully. Men wipe the dust from their faces with linen soaked in oils. A mother hums softly as she oils her child's hair, tracing small circles on their scalp. The city grows quiet. Lamps flicker through open doors. And the smell, that unmistakable Egyptian perfume, half floral, half smoky, drifts through the air like a dream. To them, beauty wasn't separate from life. It was woven into it. Into the morning wash, the temple offering, the laughter by the riverbank. And though thousands of years have passed, something about that rhythm feels strangely familiar. Even now, when archaeologists open the tombs of long-dead queens, the air still holds the ghost of those scents. A faint trace of resin, of oil, of something sweet and warm. It's as if time itself remembers. Those little alabaster jars, sealed for millennia, remind us that beauty was never a luxury in Egypt. It was a prayer, bottled and kept safe, a wish to be remembered, glowing forever beneath the sand. And so our journey begins, with oils and light, scent and silence. In the next chapter, we'll move deeper into that shimmering world, to explore the mirrors and meanings behind Egypt, its most mysterious symbol of beauty, the eyes that watched both sun and spirit. For now, just breathe in that desert air. Feel the quiet warmth of the Nile night, and drift slowly into the golden calm of ancient Egypt. The Nile never hurried. It moved the way time itself does, steady, patient, and always returning. The Egyptians built their lives around that rhythm. They rose with the sun, worked by its light, and rested as it sank behind the dunes. But the river wasn't only a source of life, it was also a mirror, one that reflected not just faces but beliefs. Every ripple of that water carried meaning. To them, reflection was sacred. When they looked into a polished bronze mirror or a calm pool of the Nile, they weren't just admiring their appearance, they were glimpsing the divine order of the world. Beauty, after all, was not separate from holiness. When a noblewoman painted her eyes black, she did it not for charm but for power. She was invoking Horus, the falcon god whose eyes saw everything, one eye the sun, the other the moon. The painted lines around human eyes echoed the markings of that sacred bird, the guardian of balance and sight. Even farmers, with their rough hands and worn linen, might trace a bit of soot around their eyes before heading out into the blinding sun. That simple act carried layers of meaning: protection, devotion, identity. If you were to walk into a household in Memphis or Thebes around 1300 BCE, you'd probably notice how many mirrors were scattered around. Small discs of polished copper or bronze, often with handles shaped like lotus stalks or goddess figures. They were surprisingly bright, glowing with reflected sunlight. A woman might hold one close to her face as she applied her kohl, or she might angle it to catch the afternoon light and illuminate a shadowed corner. Mirrors were treasures, yes, but they were also daily tools. And sometimes when the reflection shimmered too brightly, people believed it was Hathor herself smiling back. Hathor, goddess of love, joy, music, and beauty. Her face, framed by a cow's horns and the solar disk, was one of Egypt's most beloved symbols. Many mirrors bore her likeness. To look at your reflection in such a mirror was to see yourself through her eyes, radiant, divine, and worthy of care. There's something quietly touching about that in a world of sand and stone, people still surrounded themselves with small, beautiful things, polished metal, fragrant oils, colored stones. They turned daily chores into small acts of reverence. Even the preparation of cosmetics was treated with ritual precision. Mixing pigments wasn't just chemistry, it was craft and prayer combined. In some temple workshops, apprentices would grind malachite on flat stones for hours, whispering hymns as they worked. The process itself was believed to awaken the spirit of the color. When they added oil or fat to make the mixture smooth, it symbolized the union of heaven and earth, the solid and the fluid, the physical and the divine. Each motion had meaning. Each ingredient carried a whisper of eternity. The mirrors themselves could tell stories. Some were etched with dedications. May your reflection please the gods. Or simply, for my beloved. It's easy to imagine them being gifted between lovers, a reflection shared, a bond preserved. There's poetry in that gesture, isn't there? Giving someone the tool through which they see themselves. The metal mirrors were fragile things. They tarnished easily and needed constant polishing with sand or ash. But perhaps that too carried symbolism. That beauty must be renewed, cared for, tended daily like the crops along the riverbank. Picture a palace chamber in the reign of Queen Nefertari. Sunlight filters through lattice windows, striping the stone floor in gold. Servants bustle quietly around a seated figure. The queen's hair glimmers under a net of golden beads. A polished mirror stands before her, held by a handmaid whose bracelets clink softly as she moves. Nefertari studies her reflection. Perhaps she smiles slightly, or perhaps she doesn't. The mirror shows her not just her face, but her lineage, the divine blood of Isis, the chosen of the gods. To maintain her beauty was to maintain order in the kingdom. Her reflection, like the Nile, was a symbol of Egypt's prosperity. As long as the queen remained radiant, so would the land. It sounds strange to us, but for the Egyptians, beauty was almost political. Pharaohs and queens were living images of divine harmony. If they looked ill or unkempt, it was a bad omen for everyone. Even the humblest worker understood this cosmic link. A fisherman washing his face at dawn was not just cleaning away sleep, he was reenacting creation itself, the emergence of light from darkness, order from chaos. The daily routine of bathing, oiling, adorning, it all echoed the great myths of renewal that defined their world. The Egyptians saw time not as a line but as a circle, the sun dying each night and reborn each morning. Their beauty rituals followed that rhythm. Cleanse, anoint, adorn, rest. Over and over, a never-ending cycle of rebirth in miniature. And in every reflection, whether in the Nile as surface or in polished bronze, they found reassurance that life flowed on, that even in death the mirror would catch the soul's light again. Sometimes archaeologists find mirrors buried beside the dead, wrapped in linen, untouched by time. Their surfaces, dulled by centuries, still hold a faint glow. It's tempting to wonder whose face they once reflected. a noblewoman, a priest, a child lost too young. Whoever they were, their mirror was meant to serve them in the afterlife, to remind them of their own form, their ka, so they would not forget themselves in eternity. It's a strangely comforting thought, that even in a world obsessed with gods and kings, the Egyptians still cared enough to bring a mirror into death, to ensure that somewhere they could still look upon their own reflection and recognize the person they had been. The Nile glitters under the afternoon sun. Children splash at the edge of the water. Women rinse linen. Men cast nets into the deep blue. And every now and then the surface catches a face, clear for a moment, then gone. That was Egypt's understanding of beauty, fleeting but eternal, human but divine, a balance between the seen and the unseen. To them, the mirror was not vanity's toy. It was a reminder of how fragile and precious the image of life could be. The day fades. A thin mist rises from the river, wrapping the reeds in silver. Somewhere, a temple bell rings softly. The people retreat indoors, lighting lamps scented with oil. Another day of cleansing and reflection ends, and with it, another small echo of the eternal cycle. Tomorrow, the Nile will reflect the same light, and the faces that lean over its surface will, for a moment, see themselves as they were, children of both earth and sky. The Egyptians called their land Kemet, the Black Land. It wasn't a poetic title, but a practical one. The dark soil left by the Nile's floods was the lifeblood of Egypt, a ribbon of fertility through endless sand. Yet, the color black meant far more than soil. It symbolized protection, power, and renewal. And perhaps that is why so many of their faces, from peasants to pharaohs, bore the same deep black lines traced around the eyes. Kohl, the most enduring cosmetic in history. It was medicine, magic, and identity all in one. A line drawn not for fashion, but for survival. Imagine standing in the morning heat of Thebes. The air is already shimmering. Inside a shaded courtyard, a woman crouches over a low stone table. She grinds a piece of galena, a dark metallic mineral, with a small bronze pestle. The stone makes a soft, rhythmic scrape. She mixes the fine dust with oil or fat until it turns to a smooth, heavy paste. When she lifts her brush, perhaps made from a sliver of wood or a thin reed, she applies the kohl with careful precision. One steady motion along the lower lid, another sweeping outward from the corner of the eye. The effect is striking. The eyes seem larger, alive with depth and contrast. Outside, the desert sun burns white. Inside, her gaze gleams back cool and dark like the Nile under moonlight. But these painted eyes were more than beauty. They were protection. Kohl shielded against the blinding glare of the sun, yes, but it also guarded against the unseen. The Egyptians feared the evil eye, that glance of envy or malice believed to bring misfortune, and so they painted their eyes like the gods, defiant and divine. The black line mimicked the sacred markings of Horus, whose eye had been torn and restored in myth, a symbol of healing and resurrection. Every time they outlined their eyes, they reenacted that mythic healing. And there's something powerful about that, isn't there? That even the smallest act and a stroke of color could hold the weight of eternity. Men wore kohl just as much as women. Pharaohs, scribes, soldiers, all darkened their eyes before stepping into the sun. The blackened rim reduced glare and repelled flies, but it also marked status. To have well-shaped, symmetrical eyes was a sign of dignity and care. Even Ramesses II, carved in colossal stone, still bears those perfect almond-shaped outlines. And priests, before performing rituals, painted their eyes as a sacred duty. The moment the brush touched their skin, they were no longer ordinary men. They became living conduits for the divine. If you look closely at ancient wall paintings, the faces stare back with that same serene, knowing expression, outlined in black, framed in green. Eyes that seem awake even after 3,000 years. Let's pause for a moment. Close your eyes and picture an Egyptian vanity table, though vanity feels like the wrong word. A small stone tray, carved with shallow depressions for powders. Two tiny jars, one filled with green malachite, another with black galena, a slender stick for mixing, a polished bronze mirror resting nearby, its surface gleaming in the candlelight. The powders themselves glimmer faintly, green like wet leaves, black like onyx. Beside them, a small bottle of oil made from almonds or castor seeds used to bind the pigments. There's an elegance in the simplicity. Every item has a purpose. The woman dips her brush, touches it gently to her eyelid, and exhales. The scent of oil and resin fills the air. The act is quiet, deliberate, not performance, devotion. Over time, Egyptian artisans perfected their craft. They learned that certain mineral combinations created not only color, but health. The lead-based salts in coal, as modern chemists discovered, stimulated the production of nitric oxide in the skin, helping the immune system ward off infection. In other words, their beauty made them healthier. It's as though the gods rewarded their ritual with reason. Sometimes historians marvel at the precision of ancient Egyptians, their ability to blend practicality with poetry. Their cosmetics were never only aesthetic, they were alchemy. The body was their canvas, the divine their muse. It's said that Queen Cleopatra herself kept entire rooms devoted to cosmetics. Imagine her there, seated at a low table surrounded by trays of pigments, oils and brushes, servants grinding minerals, heating wax, straining flower extracts through linen, the air thick with perfume and the soft hum of preparation. Cleopatra's beauty, so often romanticized, wasn't just natural charm. It was an art form, carefully constructed. Her black-lined eyes, her red-tinted lips, her perfumed hair, each detail spoke of status, intellect, and control. She understood the language of beauty in Egypt, that appearance was communication, that color could command attention, that fragrance could disarm. Even Rome, with all its power, couldn't resist that spell. In tomb paintings, you'll notice something subtle. Every god, every queen, every mortal, their eyes are the same, outlined, luminous, alive. Even when centuries have worn the pigment away, the shape remains, carved into the stone like memory itself. That shape, the almond eye with the extended corner, became Egypt's signature. You could recognize it anywhere. On statues, coffins, jewelry, even boats. The Eye of Horus, called Wedjat, appeared everywhere as a charm for healing and protection. To paint one's eyes was to join that eternal symbol, to say, I am part of the divine order. And so, every morning, across the valley of the Nile, thousands of small rituals took place. Farmers smeared a thin layer of black paste. Priests painted sacred lines before prayer. Noble women adjusted their kohl by lamplight before stepping into their gardens. Each gesture, repeated endlessly, connected them across class and time. It's strange but comforting how something so simple could unify a civilization. The same black pigment, shared by everyone, from queen to child, was the thread that tied humanity to the gods. When you think about it, the Egyptians were the first to understand the psychological power of ritual beauty, that to paint the body was to affirm existence, to remind oneself that life was sacred, fragile, and worth adorning. At sunset, the city dims into quiet. The last light reflects off 100 faces, the outlines of their eyes catching fire for a moment before the darkness swallows it all. The air smells of dust, oil, and the faint sweetness of incense. A mother teaches her daughter how to mix the powders. A soldier rinses his face with water from a clay bowl. A priest closes his eyes, feeling the cool paint dry on his lids as he whispers a prayer to Horus. In that hush, there's a kind of peace. The same peace that lingers somehow in the ruins today, in the empty temples and cracked mirrors buried beneath the sand. Because beauty to them was never lost. It was eternal. And even now, when archaeologists unseal a tomb and find traces of black powder still clinging to a jar's edge, it feels as though someone, somewhere, is still watching. If you could travel back to ancient Egypt, the first thing you would notice isn't the sight, it's the scent. The air itself was perfumed. In temples, homes, and markets, every breeze carried traces of burning resin, crushed petals, and warm oil. It was a civilization built not only on stone but on fragrance. To the Egyptians, perfume wasn't a luxury. It was a bridge between the human and the divine. The gods, they believed, could smell purity. A good scent was a form of prayer, rising like invisible smoke to please them. Bad odors, meanwhile, were signs of disorder, spiritual and physical decay. So they fought those smells with devotion, using perfume as a kind of armor for the soul. Picture the temple of Karnak at sunrise. The air is still cool, heavy with dew. Priests begin their morning rites. They wash in sacred water, anoint their skin with oil, and light incense of myrrh and kyphi. The smoke curls upward through the columns, weaving between the carved gods. As it rises, it mingles with sunlight, creating the illusion that the temple itself is exhaling light. Kyphi was the crown jewel of Egyptian perfume. It wasn't just one scent, but a symphony of ingredients: honey, wine, raisins, myrrh, cinnamon, juniper, and sometimes cannabis or pine resin. Mixed, heated, cooled, and chanted over, it could take days to prepare. The recipe was written on temple walls and guarded by priests. When burned, kyphi was said to ease anxiety, cure insomnia, and open the gates to dreams. Even the act of making it was spiritual. Each ingredient symbolized something sacred: honey for sweetness and immortality, wine for ecstasy and connection to the gods, myrrh for preservation and divinity. When combined, they formed a scent said to heal both the body and the soul. Outside the temples, perfume followed people everywhere. In daily life, men and women wore small cones of scented fat on their heads, strange to us but ingenious in the heat. These cones slowly melted during the day, releasing fragrance and moisturizing their hair and skin. As the sun beat down, the scent of lotus, rose, and almond would rise gently from their bodies. You can almost see a noblewoman walking through a courtyard, a faint shimmer on her skin where the perfume has melted. Her hair glistens, her linen robe clings softly. The air behind her glows with a trail of sweetness and smoke. It wasn't just beauty, it was presence. Lotus was especially sacred. The blue lotus, which blooms by day and closes at night, symbolized rebirth. It was often found in tombs, depicted in paintings, held in statues, and crushed into perfume. The scent of lotus was the scent of renewal, of the sun rising again after darkness. In workshops near the river, perfume makers worked like alchemists. Clay ovens glowed with soft fire. Women pounded herbs and petals with stone mortars. Men poured hot oil into tall jars, stirring it with wooden sticks. The process was rhythmic, almost musical, a slow choreography of creation. Some perfumes were made from imported ingredients: frankincense from Punt, cedar from Lebanon, cinnamon from distant lands across the sea. These were treasures, traded along desert routes and stored in sealed alabaster jars. When those jars were opened, even centuries later, archaeologists said the air still carried a faint sweetness. There was a perfume called Mendesian, named after a city in the Nile Delta, made from myrrh, cassia, and oil of balanos. It was so famous that Greek poets later wrote about it. Another, the Susinon, used lilies and cinnamon. To wear these perfumes was to carry the scent of gods upon your skin. Perfume was medicine too. The oils healed wounds, softened skin, and soothed the sick. Myrrh and frankincense were antiseptic. Lotus calmed the nerves. Cedar oil repelled insects. A perfumer was part doctor, part priest. Their tools, tiny bronze spoons, alabaster jars, reed droppers, were as precious as surgical instruments. In the evening, as the heat faded, families gathered indoors. Lamps burned oil mixed with perfume, filling rooms with golden scent. The light flickered, the air shimmered. Someone played a harp softly. Another told stories of gods and kings. The perfume thickened around them, a blanket of sweetness that blurred the line between dream and waking. Perfume was also part of love. Lovers exchanged scented oils instead of letters. A woman might dab a bit of lotus oil behind her ears before meeting someone under the stars. A man might bring a jar of myrrh as a gift, sealed with wax, tied with a string. The language of scent was silent but powerful. One drop could say everything words could not. But there was a darker side to fragrance too. The same scents that delighted the living were used to mask decay and death. In embalming rooms, the same oils that anointed priests anointed corpses. Myrrh preserved the flesh, cedar filled the lungs, cinnamon wrapped the body in warmth. The perfumes of the dead and the living came from the same jars. Still, even in death, it was an act of reverence. To smell beautiful was to be remembered kindly by the gods. A sweet scent was a form of immortality. Sometimes I imagine walking through a festival in Thebes. The air is thick with incense. Musicians play, dancers move, and everywhere the scent of burning myrrh and melting cones drifts like golden fog. Children laugh, priests chant, lovers whisper. The whole city breathes in rhythm, one enormous perfume temple under the sky. And somewhere among them, a woman closes her eyes, takes a deep breath, and smiles. She doesn't know that 3,000 years later, someone will still be wondering what she smelled like, and still dreaming of the sweetness that filled her world. The Egyptian sun was both a gift and a trial. Every dawn it rose like a blessing, painting the limestone temples in gold, but by midday it turned merciless. Skin cracked, lips burned, and hair withered beneath that blazing sky. And yet, if you look at their statues and wall paintings, the Egyptians always seem radiant, smooth, perfect, as if sunlight had polished them instead of punished them. They believed that the body was not just flesh, it was the vessel of the divine. And so to care for the skin was to honor the gods themselves. Every priest, every noblewoman, even every farmer had their own version of skin care. Some mixed oils to soothe, others to protect, and others still to simply shine. Picture a woman seated in her courtyard, early morning. She grinds red ochre with a drop of water until it becomes a fine glowing paste. This she dabs gently onto her cheeks. The color isn't bold, it's soft, like the blush of the desert at sunrise. On her table rest small jars of unguents, almond oil for her arms, castor for her lips, and honey for her hands. Honey, always honey. The gods themselves, she believed, favored its sweetness. Honey was sacred. It healed wounds, softened skin, and smelled faintly of eternity. Priests called it the food of the gods. Mixed with milk or oil, it became the foundation of countless balms. Even Cleopatra, centuries later, was said to bathe in milk and honey, a ritual of renewal rather than vanity. In the workshops along the Nile, craftsmen produced oil in small clay presses. They crushed almonds, moringa seeds, and balanos fruits, straining the golden liquid into alabaster jars. These oils were sold in markets, carried on donkeys to palaces and temples, and traded as far as Syria and Crete. To the Egyptians, oil wasn't just a luxury, it was survival, bottled sunlight to protect the body from its own brilliance. Men used oil as much as women did. Soldiers rubbed it into their arms before battle, not only for strength but for symbolism, the sheen of order against the chaos of war. Priests anointed themselves before entering the temple, believing that fragrance and purity made them more acceptable to the gods. A farmer after a long day might oil his skin before sleep, finding comfort in the simple ritual of restoration. If you could walk into one of those ancient homes, the air would smell faintly of beeswax and myrrh. A small lamp would flicker nearby. You'd see jars stacked on shelves, labeled not with words but with symbols, flowers, suns, or waves. Each one held a different mixture. Oil for the face, balm for the lips, salve for the feet. These were not indulgences. They were medicine, protection, prayer. The skin, after all, was the boundary between the mortal and the divine. To keep it whole and beautiful was to preserve the soul inside. They also believed in exfoliation, though they wouldn't have called it that. Women used fine sand or powdered limestone to polish their skin. Afterward, they would rinse with cool water, apply oil, and finish with a light dusting of scented powder made from crushed lotus petals. The effect was both practical and heavenly. Their skin glowed, their scent lingered, and their gods smiled. The Egyptians were masters of balance. Their beauty rituals always existed halfway between practicality and faith. When they protected their skin from the sun, they also reenacted the eternal struggle between light and life. Ra, the sun god, traveled across the sky each day fighting darkness. To keep one's skin radiant was to join him, to resist decay and disorder. And so creams and ointments bore names that reflected divine protection. One ancient recipe reads, "Ointment for transforming the skin of a man into the skin of a god." It contained cedar oil, honey, frankincense, and a rare resin called labdanum. The instructions were careful and poetic. "Anoint thyself when the stars rise, and thou shalt shine like Ra upon the horizon." Imagine following that instruction under a midnight sky. The air still warm, the scent of oil glimmering faintly, the skin alive with softness. It's not hard to see why they believed beauty was spiritual. In tombs, archaeologists have found small alabaster jars still sealed with beeswax. When opened, they sometimes release the faintest trace of fragrance, a ghost of the past, sweet and dusty. These were the same ointments meant to accompany the dead into eternity. Even in the afterlife, the body had to be preserved, anointed, cared for. To decay was to fall out of favor with the gods. To remain fragrant was to remain blessed. There's a quiet beauty in that faith, that the skin, so fragile, could carry divine meaning. Every wrinkle, every scar, every mark of time was softened by the touch of oils and honey. Even aging, in their eyes, was not a loss of beauty but a transformation of it, an evolution toward wisdom and light. At night, when the desert cooled, women would sit together on rooftops and share their ointments. They laughed softly, the moonlight catching their polished arms, the scent of myrrh and honey drifting into the air. Some might have shared recipes whispered from mother to daughter. Others might have simply enjoyed the silence of the stars. Their hands, slick with oil, gleamed as they gestured, telling stories of gods and love. Down below, the Nile shimmered like a strip of molten bronze. The temples slept, but their fragrance, incense and oil and salt, still clung to the air, and somewhere a priest was preparing another mixture for the morning. The cycle continued: wash, anoint, pray, and glow. The Egyptians saw beauty not as indulgence, but as gratitude. To anoint the body was to say thank you, to the gods, to the river, to the life that pulsed through every grain of sand. In that gratitude, they found peace, and in their glowing skin they found something eternal, a reflection of the divine. The next time you see a statue of an Egyptian god, smooth, radiant, glowing with an almost human softness, remember that it wasn't carved to flatter. It was carved to imitate the ideal of beauty they lived by. The skin of the gods was flawless, not because it was perfect, but because it was loved. In the shimmering heat of Egypt, hair was never just hair. It was status, identity, protection, and art, woven together with oils, perfumes, and craft. The desert sun was unkind to the scalp, and so wigs became more than adornment. They were armor made beautiful. If you picture an Egyptian noble, perhaps what comes to mind is that signature style: black, sleek, heavy with braids, the ends cut in perfect symmetry. Yet under that glossy perfection was something practical: a shaved head. Men, women, even children often shaved their hair completely to stay clean and cool in the heat. It kept away lice, it eased washing, and it made the daily anointing of the skin simpler. But of course they didn't remain bareheaded for long. On special occasions, and often even at home, they wore wigs. Imagine the workshop of a wig maker in Thebes. The smell of melted beeswax and castor oil fills the room. Strips of human hair, goat hair, and sometimes palm fiber hang neatly on the wall. The craftsman sits cross-legged, his fingers working rhythmically as he weaves strands into a linen base. Each section is braided, then coated lightly in beeswax to hold its shape. The process could take days. For the wealthy, the hair was perfumed with lotus oil and dusted with ground gold. For priests, it was kept simpler, pure black, symbolic of rebirth. And though the wigs looked heavy, they were often light and cool, designed with airy patterns that let the scalp breathe. The Egyptians loved contrast: order in chaos, light in darkness, smoothness in heat. Their wigs embodied that harmony. A noblewoman preparing for a feast would choose her wig carefully. One might be short and layered, another long and beaded. Some were adorned with flowers: blue lotus tucked behind the ear, cornflowers threaded through the braids. Others were topped with delicate headbands of gold or faience beads. Servants would help fit it onto her shaved scalp, securing it with resin and pins. Then, as the final touch, they would drip a small cone of perfumed fat atop the wig. At first it must have seemed strange, a little lump of wax resting like a jewel on her head. But as the night went on, the heat of her body and the warmth of the room would melt it slowly, releasing waves of scent: myrrh, cinnamon, and lotus. By the time she rose to dance or laugh or greet guests, her hair glistened, and the air around her shimmered with perfume. Hair carried deep meaning in Egyptian culture. To have clean, fragrant, ordered hair was a sign of inner harmony. Priests shaved completely as a symbol of purity. Soldiers kept it short for practicality. Children often wore a single lock of hair on the side of the head, the side lock of youth, a mark of innocence. And the dead, too, wore wigs into eternity. In tombs, mummies were fitted with elaborate wigs of real or imitation hair, sometimes even painted onto the coffins themselves. It was believed that in the afterlife, one would appear young and beautiful forever, hair shining, untouched by decay. There's a quiet tenderness in how they treated hair. Even when shaved off, it wasn't discarded carelessly. Locks of loved ones were sometimes kept as keepsakes, tied in cloth, placed in tombs, or burned with incense, a gesture of remembrance, fragrant and fleeting. And wigs were personal. They were oiled, cleaned, and combed with care. There are records of women owning multiple wigs, one for daily wear, another for ceremonies, another for funerals. Each one carried a piece of their story. When archaeologists uncover ancient wigs, the hair still glows faintly red-brown under light, preserved by oils and beeswax. Some are braided so finely that the pattern looks almost like fabric. Imagine that, thousands of years old, and yet each strand still whispers of someone who once wore it with pride. Men's wigs had their own distinct style. Short, rounded shapes for scribes and priests, thicker, heavier versions for courtiers and nobles. Even pharaohs wore ceremonial wigs, some with rows of tiny curls, others straight and layered. The famous blue-striped Nemes headdress that we associate with pharaohs wasn't hair, but it carried the same symbolism: divine order, eternal youth, power made visible. To appear bald in public without a wig was rare, unless you were of the priesthood or the very poor. But even those without wealth would rub oil into their scalps, smoothing and shining it as best they could. A simple, quiet echo of the divine elegance seen in the courts. Hair oils were themselves small miracles, made from a base of castor or moringa oil, mixed with cedar, cinnamon, and animal fat. They nourished and perfumed the scalp. One recipe found on a papyrus reads, "Oil for the growth of hair, warm fat of the lion mixed with the blood of the black cat." Strange, yes, but such mixtures carried symbolic meaning. Lions represented strength, cats grace and beauty. Their essence, even imagined, was meant to restore vitality. Not all recipes were so exotic. Most used honey, beeswax, or fig juice. And the goal was always the same: balance between body, spirit, and scent. At festivals, hair was everywhere, braided, curled, shimmering with gold dust. Dancers wore wigs that swung with every movement, each twist releasing perfume. Children ran through the crowds, the little locks on their heads bouncing with laughter. From afar, a crowd like that must have looked like a moving tapestry of black and gold threads glinting under the sun. And at the center of it all, the priests burned incense and poured oil onto statues of the gods, who themselves wore perfect eternal wigs, sculpted in stone, shining forever. There's something deeply human in the Egyptians' obsession with hair. Beneath the ritual, the hierarchy, and the symbolism, it was all about connection, to beauty, to cleanliness, to memory. They understood that hair holds identity, that it can be shaped, adorned, and transformed, yet still carry something intimate and personal. And maybe that's why when they sent their dead into the afterlife, they did so with hair gleaming like the sunrise, soft, perfumed, and everlasting. Because in their eyes, to be remembered as beautiful was to be remembered as alive. For all the splendor of Egypt's temples and perfumes, beauty often lived in the smallest details. The quiet places people rarely think to look: fingertips, teeth, amulets tucked beneath linen. These were the finishing touches of a civilization that saw no divide between the sacred and the mundane. Every part of the body mattered because every part was a reflection of the soul. The hands, in particular, carried special meaning. They built, blessed, anointed, and offered. They held food, wrote prayers, and comforted the living and the dead. So it makes sense that the Egyptians paid careful attention to their nails, keeping them clean, oiled, and colored. Archaeologists have uncovered tiny bronze tools in tombs: nail cleaners, files, tweezers, and cuticle sticks. Some even had handles shaped like papyrus stalks or lotus blossoms, turning grooming into art. It wasn't vanity, it was devotion. Nail polish, or something like it, existed here long before it became fashionable elsewhere. Wealthy Egyptians stained their nails using henna, a reddish dye made from crushed leaves. The deeper the color, the higher the status. Royal women often had dark, rust-colored nails, while the poor used lighter tones or none at all. To paint one's nails wasn't just a matter of beauty, it was symbolic, an echo of life, blood, and vitality. In death, many mummies were found with henna still visible on their fingers and toes, a sign that beauty accompanied them into eternity. Servants often prepared henna paste fresh each day, mixing it with water, oil, and sometimes myrrh for scent. The paste was spread on the fingertips, then wrapped in linen until the color set. When removed, it left a warm, earthy hue, a whisper of the desert's own tones. The Egyptians' fascination with cleanliness extended to the mouth. They were among the first to practice oral hygiene, though their methods might make a modern dentist wince. They made toothpaste from a mix of powdered ash, ground pumice, and salt. Some even added mint or dried flowers to freshen the breath. A few ancient recipes survive, written in hieratic script on brittle papyrus. One reads, "A remedy to make the mouth taste sweet. Grind rock salt, mint, pepper, and iris flowers. Mix with honey and form pellets." It sounds almost pleasant, doesn't it? Until you remember that pumice is volcanic rock. The result cleaned well but wore down enamel over time. Still, they tried, and that effort speaks volumes. They also made toothbrushes of a sort, frayed twigs chewed until soft, dipped in salt or vinegar. Even the poorest Egyptian likely scrubbed their teeth with something each morning, spitting into a clay bowl before eating. To them, a clean mouth wasn't cosmetic. It was moral. It prepared them to speak truth, the sacred act of ma'at, balance, and honesty. Teeth were another sign of fortune. Healthy white teeth meant vitality, while tooth decay hinted at imbalance. Some wealthier Egyptians wore amulets shaped like tiny molars, hoping to ward off pain. Others used herbal rinses to soothe toothaches, clove, cinnamon, and sometimes beer mixed with resin. And because pain was often seen as the work of spirits, priests would recite spells as they applied the medicine. "Depart, worm of decay, from the tooth of this servant of Ra." It's hard not to smile at the image, a mixture of science, faith, and hope wrapped in poetry. But beyond nails and teeth, Egypt's beauty had an invisible layer: charms, hidden under linen garments, amulets pressed against the skin, whispering silent prayers of protection. A tiny scarab for rebirth, an ankh for life, a wadjet eye for strength and health. Many of these charms were placed in the same spots that people anointed with oils: the wrists, the neck, the chest. The ritual was both physical and spiritual, to adorn the skin and the spirit in a single gesture. Even children wore them. A small shell around the neck, a faience bead at the ankle. The amulet might catch the sunlight for a moment, flashing blue or green before vanishing back beneath the folds of linen. To the Egyptians, that hidden gleam was the real magic, beauty that no one else could see but the gods. It's easy to imagine how these small rituals filled the rhythm of everyday life. A man sitting by the window, trimming his nails as he listens to the distant hum of the marketplace. A woman smiling faintly as she rinses her mouth with cool water scented with mint. A mother tying a charm around her child's wrist before bed, murmuring a blessing into the night air. These were the quiet acts that stitched beauty into the fabric of life, unnoticed but essential. And in those gestures lies something universal. We still do it, don't we? We polish, brush, anoint, and protect, not just for appearance, but for comfort, for confidence, for peace. The Egyptians simply recognized that impulse as sacred. In one tomb near Deir el-Medina, archaeologists discovered a small chest filled with cosmetics and grooming tools. Inside were tweezers, bronze razors, jars of perfumed oil, a mirror, and a delicate ivory comb. The comb's teeth were worn smooth by years of use. On its handle was carved a single line, "For the joy of living." That phrase could have been the motto of Egyptian beauty. Their rituals were never just about looking good. They were about feeling alive even in a world surrounded by death and desert. Some priests wore polished nails when performing ceremonies, believing that light reflected from their hands guided divine energy. Others carried small bottles of oil tied to their belts, used to anoint anyone seeking healing. When their fingers brushed another's skin, It left behind not only fragrance but reassurance that the gods had touched them, if only for a moment. Even laborers whose days were spent in dust and heat found ways to honor their bodies. They might rinse their hands in the Nile, smooth clay from their palms, or dip a fingertip in oil before eating. These were their hidden luxuries, small acts of dignity in a demanding life. When the day was done and Egypt fell into its long, soft dusk, these gestures lingered in the air. The scent of henna, the faint glimmer of oil on skin, the cold shine of bronze tools resting on a table, 1,000 little details, forgotten by history but once loved deeply. The Egyptians believed the gods noticed everything, even the way a person cared for their nails, their smile, their skin. And maybe that's why they took such care with their bodies, because to be beautiful was not to be perfect, but to be attentive. To live beautifully was to live consciously. For the Egyptians, death was never an ending. It was a doorway, a passage into another kind of life, one that mirrored the world they already knew, but perfected, eternal, and filled with light. And just as they prepared their bodies each morning for the living day, they prepared their bodies once more for the long journey beyond. Beauty in this final act became sacred ritual, the art of eternity. To die beautifully was to die correctly. It meant balance, purity, and care. The same oils, perfumes, and pigments that had touched the skin in life returned in death, transforming the body into something divine. The goal was not to hide decay, but to preserve harmony, to keep the vessel worthy of the soul that would one day awaken again. Imagine stepping into the embalming workshop, the air thick with the scent of resin and cedar. Lamps flicker against the stone walls. Priests move quietly, their heads shaved, their hands anointed. The body lies on a low wooden table, washed in sacred water from the Nile. Before any wrapping begins, the skin is oiled, carefully, reverently. Castor, myrrh, cedar, and frankincense are massaged into the flesh. The mixture smells both sweet and medicinal, a balance of comfort and power. The priest murmurs blessings as he works, calling upon Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead. To touch the body is not an act of sorrow, it is devotion. Every motion, every layer of linen is a prayer. The dead were never seen as gone, only traveling. The Egyptians understood something profound. That scent could transcend time. Myrrh, cinnamon, lotus, and honey, these were not just perfumes. They were memory made tangible. When used in embalming, their aromas lingered for centuries, soft and ghostly, like voices from another age. When tombs were opened thousands of years later, explorers reported catching faint traces of sweetness, a whisper of incense still trapped in the air. Those scents were more than survival. They were triumphs of human care. Perfume bridged worlds. It connected the living who prepared the body with the divine who awaited it, and perhaps even with us, the distant witnesses who breathe it in millennia later. Cosmetics followed the dead too. Jars of kohl, lip pigment, and ointment were placed in tombs beside mirrors and combs. Death for an Egyptian was no reason to neglect appearance. One must meet the gods clean, fragrant, and radiant. The Book of the Dead, that great poetic guide to the afterlife, even describes the deceased as speaking to Osiris. My mouth is pure, my skin oiled, my limbs anointed. I am beautiful in your presence. The afterlife, they believed, mirrored the best parts of earthly existence. The breeze of the Nile, the laughter of feasts, the scent of flowers blooming endlessly. To enter that paradise, one had to arrive prepared, both in spirit and in scent. Mummification itself was a kind of beautification. After the organs were removed and preserved, the body was filled with aromatic materials, sawdust soaked in resin, linen stuffed with cinnamon and cassia. The skin was coated in oils and wrapped with thousands of strips of cloth, each layer sprinkled with incense. The priests didn't rush. This process took weeks, sometimes months. At every stage, hymns were sung and prayers whispered. The care they took was astonishing, not just technical precision, but emotional grace. To tend to the dead was to serve both human and God, and beneath it all was a quiet belief that beauty protected, that a well-preserved body was a shield against chaos, just as makeup protected the eyes from disease and evil. Even the coffins reflected this reverence. Painted faces smiled serenely, lips tinted red, eyes rimmed in black kohl. The skin was colored gold, not as ornament but as transformation. Gold was the flesh of the gods, untarnished and eternal. By painting the body or coffin gold, they symbolically turned the deceased into a divine being. That golden glow wasn't luxury, it was prayer in pigment. When Tutankhamun's burial mask was discovered, the world marveled at its beauty. Yet for the Egyptians, it was simply the natural conclusion of life, the body reborn in the image of divinity. His face, serene and perfect, represented not a boy king but a god restored. The tombs themselves were beauty made permanent, walls painted with gardens, feasts, dancers, and boats gliding on the Nile. The dead were surrounded by everything they loved, the smell of myrrh, the sound of music, the touch of silk. One tomb inscription reads, "I rest in fragrance, I sleep in light." You can almost feel the peace in those words. The Egyptians didn't fear death because they had rehearsed it their entire lives. In every cleansing, every prayer, every drop of oil placed upon the skin, they were always preparing, gently, for eternity. It's remarkable how modern it feels, this yearning to remain whole, remembered and dignified. We keep photographs, they kept perfume. We embalm with chemicals, they embalmed with honey and resin. The impulse is the same, to hold on, to soften loss, to turn goodbye into continuity. Their faith was that the senses, sight, scent, touch, would still matter beyond the grave. That a loved one might breathe again, might smell the lotus, might feel the warmth of oil on their skin. And maybe, in a way, they were right. The fact that we still sense them, that we still smell those ancient resins, still see their painted eyes shining back from stone, suggests that they succeeded. Their beauty survived, lingering like the faintest perfume of time itself. In the end, beauty in death was not about deception but truth, the truth that care matters, that love persists through touch, through scent, through memory. To die beautifully in their eyes was to be loved well, to leave behind a body tended, a face serene, and a scent that told the gods, "I cherished the life you gave me." And perhaps that's why the Egyptians, more than any other people, still feel alive to us. Their beauty was never vanity. It was faith made fragrant. The desert keeps secrets well. For thousands of years, Egypt's beauty slept beneath the dunes, sealed in jars, painted on walls, buried in silence. The wind swept over the tombs, the temples crumbled, and the people who once mixed perfumes and crushed stones into coal faded into dust. But the echoes remained. Every time an archaeologist's brush lifts another grain of sand, the story breathes again, faint but familiar. A comb still slick with oil, a jar of perfume sealed with wax, a mirror so polished it catches the light like it remembers the sun. These fragments whisper of the same quiet obsession that filled Egypt, its living world, the belief that beauty was an act of balance, a form of devotion, and a bridge to eternity. Imagine the Valley of the Kings at dawn. The cliffs rise pale against the sky. Somewhere deep beneath them, hidden in the cool rock, lies a chamber untouched for 3 millennia. The air inside is still. When the seal is finally broken, it exhales a sigh. A faint, sweet aroma of resin and dust. That scent, trapped since the time of Rameses, is the oldest perfume on earth. It carries no name, no maker's mark, yet it tells everything. That someone once took the time to grind, mix, and bless those ingredients. Someone cared deeply about how life and death should smell. It is humbling to realize that long before our words for art or science existed, they had already merged them in every gesture of care. In museum glass cases, the evidence of that care gleams quietly. There are jars shaped like ducks, carved from alabaster so thin that light passes through them. Their stoppers are still crusted with resin, their necks stained dark with ancient oils. One can almost imagine the hand that lifted them each morning, the voice that whispered a prayer before sealing them again. Nearby, a wooden chest holds cosmetic tools, a bronze mirror, an ivory applicator, a tiny spoon for perfume. Their handles are worn smooth from fingers that once used them daily. Each object is practical but also intimate, a piece of someone's routine, saved for eternity. And in the stillness of those displays, there's a sense that the people who made and used them are not gone. They are only waiting to be remembered. When archaeologists found the tomb of Queen Hatshepsut's nurse, they discovered something small but astonishing. Traces of perfume still clinging to the linen wrappings. Chemists later analyzed it and recreated the formula, a blend of myrrh, cinnamon, and palm wine. The scent was warm, deep, and strangely familiar. When it was first released into the air after thousands of years, the researchers grew quiet. One of them said it felt like shaking hands with time. There is something deeply moving in that we can still smell the world as they did. The same air, the same sweetness drifting across centuries. Not all discoveries are grand. Sometimes they are heartbreakingly personal. In one tomb, a simple wooden comb rests beside a woman's head. Its teeth are broken from use. A jar near her feet still holds dried traces of malachite, her kohl. In life, she must have painted her eyes carefully each day, and whoever buried her made sure she could continue that ritual forever. Elsewhere, in the ruins of Deir el-Medina, a village of artisans who built the royal tombs, archaeologists found scraps of linen with smudges of lipstick-like pigment. It seems even those who carved walls for kings took time to decorate themselves before the day's work began. Beauty was not reserved for royalty. It belonged to everyone. That equality, that shared participation in grace, may be the most beautiful thing Egypt left us. Even the tools of beauty bear traces of affection. Some mirrors were engraved with dedications, "To she who shines brighter than the moon." A gift for my beloved. One imagines them given between lovers, or perhaps passed down generations, mother to daughter, friend to friend. When those objects are unearthed, they carry more than craftsmanship. They carry emotion, preserved as surely as the oils within their jars. The archaeologist's brush in that moment does more than clean. It resurrects. But not everything survived kindly. The same sands that preserved also destroyed. Perfumes evaporated, powders turned to dust, fabrics crumbled into lace-like threads. And yet, in their fragility, they left behind outlines, ghosts of color, imprints of care. A faint circle on a wooden tray shows where a jar once stood. A patch of discoloration on a mummy's cheek marks where pigment once touched skin. Even absence becomes testimony. It's as if Egypt itself wanted to remind us, beauty fades, but the memory of its making endures. Modern scientists, in their own way, have become priests of rediscovery. They use infrared scans, chromatography, and microscopes to read what the eyes cannot see. They identify traces of lotus oil, detect microscopic granules of malachite, recreate scents that haven't existed for millennia. And each revelation brings us closer not just to their formulas, but to their philosophy. The Egyptians didn't separate the aesthetic from the sacred, or the physical from the spiritual. They understood that everything, a drop of oil, a stroke of color, a comb of hair, was part of a greater harmony. Their legacy lives on every time we anoint, decorate, or adorn ourselves. Walk through Cairo's museums, and you can almost feel the echoes in the air. The rooms smell faintly of linen, stone, and dust, but beneath it, if you close your eyes, you might imagine the sweetness that once filled the Nile valleys. Beauty to them was not about admiration. It was about continuity. It was their way of saying to time itself, we were here, we lived, we cared, lived. And so beneath the desert that silences everything, the echoes remain as soft as perfume, patient as stone. The desert is quiet now. The temples stand in ruins, the paint on the walls faded to soft echoes of color, and the great statues gaze endlessly toward horizons that no longer remember their builders. And yet, Egypt still glows, not with fire or gold, but with memory, a soft, undying light that comes from the way its people once lived, loved and saw beauty in everything. It is easy to think of the Egyptians as distant, marble-faced gods of history, but the truth is warmer. Their lives were full of laughter and fragrance, music and tenderness. They cared deeply for the fragile things, the smell of flowers, the coolness of oil, the shimmer of hair beneath the sun. And in that care they achieved something we still long for, a harmony between the body and the soul, the fleeting and the eternal. Picture the end of a long day in Thebes. The heat has faded and the light has softened to gold. Along the riverbank, people gather to bathe, washing away dust with laughter and song. A woman oils her arms, the scent of almond drifting over the water. A man trims his beard by the reflection of the setting sun. Children chase each other with reeds, their giggles mixing with the hum of insects. Everything feels calm, balanced, alive. Somewhere nearby, a priest lights the evening incense. The first curl of smoke rises into the warm air, kyphi, myrrh, lotus, and the entire world seems to breathe in unison. For a moment, time holds its breath. And then the wind carries the scent away across the river, over the dunes into eternity. Egypt's beauty rituals weren't just about appearance, they were about connection. To care for the body was to acknowledge the divine spark within it. To oil the skin was to honor the gift of life. To anoint the dead was to promise that love endures even beyond the grave. Every gesture meant something. A brushstroke of kohl, a prayer for protection. A handful of sand used for washing, a symbol of renewal. A cone of perfume melting slowly through the night. A quiet reminder that pleasure, too, was sacred. It was never about vanity. It was gratitude, expressed through scent and touch. Even now, when we recreate their oils or display their artifacts in glass cases, something of that gratitude lingers. A jar of lotus perfume, a golden comb, a mirror shaped like a goddess. These are not just objects. They're messages left for us. They whisper, "Take care of yourself," the gods notice. The gods. And maybe that's why the story of Egyptian beauty still moves us, because deep down we share that same impulse. We too want to feel connected to something larger than ourselves. We too seek small rituals that make us feel human and holy all at once. There's a poem carved into a limestone wall written nearly 4,000 years ago. It reads, "Bathe in water, anoint with oil. Let your heart be glad for the day that comes. Follow your desire while you live, for none take their goods with them, and none who go come back again." It isn't morbid, it's wise. It tells us what the Egyptians already knew, that beauty is fleeting, and that's exactly what makes it divine. They didn't chase immortality through power, they found it in care. In the way a mother braided her daughter's hair, in the way a lover offered a jar of oil, in the way the living prepared their dead with tenderness, not fear. Today, the sands have covered so much, the perfumes have faded, the oils turned to dust, the colors dimmed. But the idea, the heartbeat, remains. It hums through the centuries, soft but steady. That beauty is not an illusion, nor a mask. It's a way of saying thank you to existence. When you light a candle, when you wash your face, when you wear a scent that makes you feel calm and alive, you are, in some small way, continuing their legacy. You are part of that same quiet conversation between the human and the eternal. Imagine walking through the ruins at dusk. The stones glow pink in the fading sun. The hieroglyphs catch the last light, their carved lines still sharp after thousands of years. A breeze stirs the sand, and for a moment it smells faintly sweet, or maybe that's only imagination. Still, the feeling remains, that this place remembers, that somewhere beneath your feet lies a jar of perfume sealed and waiting, that if it were opened, the air would fill again with the scent of lotus and honey and thyme. And maybe the gods themselves would smile, because beauty, once given, never truly fades. It lingers, in the sheen of ancient gold, in the rhythm of a river that still flows, in the quiet hands that even now reach across history to touch what's left. Egypt glows not because its monuments are large, but because its people lived with grace. They saw holiness in hygiene, art in routine, and eternity in fragrance. They taught us that to care for the body is to care for the soul, that every act of cleansing, adorning, or anointing is a prayer in disguise. And in that lesson, they achieved the one thing every civilization longs for, to be remembered not only for their power, but for their tenderness. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think of them. The men and women who once stood by the Nile, oil on their skin, scent in their hair, the sun setting on their golden world. They are gone, but their rituals remain. They glow through the centuries, quiet as candlelight, soft as breath. And if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear them say, "Breathe deeply. Be gentle, care for your body, and you will honor your soul. Because beauty, true beauty, was never their luxury. It was their prayer.